My name is Richard Leong, and I'm an educator, a facilitator, a lactose-intolerant Asian that's still drinking bubble milk tea, and I'm a social justice warrior. Now, that can mean a lot of different things to different people, right? But to me, what that means is I think about race and identity all the time. I think about it from the small ways, the small interactions, like how we might say hi to each other, all the way up to these big systems of power, privilege, and oppression, right? And I know normal people are not like this, right? So I've tried to figure out how I ended up this way, and I don't really know the answer, but I do know one thing. I know that my childhood bullying has a lot to do with it. From the time that we settled down in Irvine in Orange County, from third grade all the way through, well, even after I graduated high school, I have these incredibly vivid memories of the other kids at school picking on me. They would find me at recess, they would pull me off to the side, they'd pull their eyes back and yell in my face, chink, chink, chink. But the thing is, I think I became incredibly passionate about Asian American identity and spaces like Crushing the Myth because none of these kids were white. All of the kids who called me chink were Korean American kids. And I remember in 7th grade telling my wife and Kyle about it. I was like, Kyle, they won't stop. And he was like, I don't get it. Aren't you all Asian? The thing is, what Kyle wasn't thinking about, and what 7th grade Richard wasn't thinking about either, is that we were growing up in a world where the word Asian American was this preconceived notion. It was this given idea, right? We weren't thinking about how radical it was that millions of people in this country, across dozens of different communities, all with their unique differences, could be categorized and grouped up in these two words, Asian American, right? And therein, I think, lies the incompleteness of the myth, in that it erases and invisibilizes the differences between our community. When I graduated from college at Columbia University, I packed up everything I owned and I moved to Minnesota to take up a job as a 5th grade teacher in the Frogtown neighborhood of St. Paul. My classroom reflected the demographics of the community it was built in, 99% low income, and a mix of predominantly Black, Latinx, and Asian students, most of whom were Hmong. I'll never forget this one time where I took one of my Hmong students on a field trip to the movies. We went to go see a movie at the theater. And afterwards, she told me, you know, Mr. Leong, this is the first time I've ever been inside a movie theater. And in that moment, I thought about all the division word problems I'd given her, where I was like, hey, if there's this many seats in the theater and there's this many rooms, how many seats does each room hold? No wonder she didn't know that was a division word problem. She'd never been inside a theater. She didn't know what the inside of a movie theater looked like. Because while I spent my 5th grade weekends going to the theaters with my friends and my parents, she spent her 5th grade weekends working at the food stall that her parents owned at the local marketplace, helping to put food on the table, helping to sustain her family's livelihood. So I ask you, what exactly does it mean to be Asian American? What exactly is it that ties us together? When we do successfully crush the myth, because we will, what is it that's going to tie us together as a community when that day comes? These questions are why I was so drawn to Sandra Oh's quote about it being an honor just to be Asian, because I think it's actually a challenge. It's a challenge to look past the myth and dig deep into our histories and find that answer for ourselves in ways that the myth and all of the other boundaries and societal expectations around being Asian American, they could never answer for us. I currently have the privilege to work in leadership development spaces. And what that means is I get to build and facilitate spaces for Asian Americans to come together and think about our identities and think about these questions for ourselves. Now, to be clear, I am not talking about hotel conference rooms where you kind of shuffle from ballroom to ballroom and listen to panelist after panelist and kind of just melt into the invisibility of the crowd. No, I'm talking about authentic spaces. I'm talking about authentic workshops and intimate conversations where Asian Americans can get together and learn about the history that we were never taught. So what is that history? Asian American was a term coined by activists and students in the 60s. It was an intentional effort to build solidarity between other Asian communities, both in the United States and around the world. They were influenced by leaders in other movements also led by communities of color, like the Black Power movement, the Third World Liberation Front, and the anti-war movement. They were doing something incredibly radically new, which is imagining that our collective struggle around the world could lead to a collective liberation. That the spiderweb of isms out there, that racism, sexism, capitalism, imperialism, They made up a matrix that chained all of us together. But only by considering it in its entirety could we begin to liberate ourselves in its entirety. And so today, as we begin to consider what it means to be Asian American beyond the myth, I think it's critically important that we remember this history. Organizing, activism, liberation, this work lives on in the word Asian American itself. And when we forget that, when we allow ourselves to fall into the model minority myth, we allow white supremacy culture to tear ourselves apart from each other and from other communities of color. Too often when Asian Americans are in the news, we are used as a foil to other communities of color, as a way to criticize, whether implicitly or explicitly, hey, why aren't you like the Asians? They work so hard, they're doing so great, why can't you be more like them? In my work, I've seen the power of building spaces like this. In my work, I've had the opportunity to go to workshops and spaces, and sometimes just straight up brunch at my friend's house on a Sunday morning to get together with other Asian American and Pacific Islander activists and consider what our identities mean to us. I've been able to build a community that's grounded in love and accountability. And honestly, I know these things work because I wouldn't be standing in front of you here today. A side effect, or maybe it's the main effect, I don't know, but something that happened because of all that childhood bullying is that to this day, I remain incredibly insecure. These kinds of things are terrifying, y'all. Like, I'm like sweating right here, right now. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here, right? There are days where I question whether or not I'm smart enough, whether or not I'm radical enough, whether or not I'm brave enough, and I feel incredibly small and inadequate. And I wonder if maybe I'm secretly this giant burden on all of my friends and family, and they're just like not telling me. But I'm also here because of the spaces that I've been in, and the friends that I've made, and the folks who remind me that we do have power, we do have leadership, and we have the ability to make an impact. Just a few months ago, I wrapped up a summer program that I helped work for Asian American and Pacific Islander undergraduates. And in that program, at the end of it rather, one of the interns told me, you know, this is one of the safest spaces I've ever been in. And another one told me, hey, I understand now that my existence, my very existence, is a political statement. Can you imagine the impact that they'll have over the course of their life, knowing and leaning into their leadership while they're still in college? To go back to Sandra Oh, it has always been an honor just to be Asian American. But we won't know that for ourselves until we invest in more spaces like this, where we can come together as a community and collectively explore the history that we've always deserved. Because if the systems that exist now, the world that we have now, can't give that to us, then we're just gonna have to do it ourselves, just like the activists, those artists of activism and those poets of power and purpose who first coined the word Asian American, just as they did. The world we deserve does not yet exist, but we can build it together. We are the leaders we've been waiting for. And I am so incredibly proud and excited to dream about that world and build it together. Thank you.